The lipstick was tucked between the bathroom sink and the little ceramic soap dish I'd bought at a market in Lisbon on our 3rd anniversary trip. It wasn't mine. I knew that immediately, the way you know something before your brain has finished forming the sentence. The color was a deep burgundy, Bordeaux probably, or something with a name like that. The kind of dramatic, saturated red that looked beautiful on the right woman and garish on the wrong one. I picked it up with 2 fingers, turned it over. No brand visible. The bottom was worn smooth, which meant it had lived in someone's bag for a while. It had been used enough that the tip was slightly angled, shaped to someone else's lips. The bathroom smelled like Daniel's aftershave. Outside the window, I could hear my mother downstairs, already arguing with the florist about the centerpieces. My dress was hanging on the back of the closet door in its white garment bag. My maid of honor, Soo Jin, was due to arrive in 40 minutes with a bottle of Prosecco and a playlist she'd been curating for 3 months. I set the lipstick down. I looked at myself in the mirror, mascara not yet on, hair in a loose braid, skin still a little puffy from sleep, and I thought, okay, so that's what today is. I wasn't shaking. That surprised me, faintly, the way a plot twist surprises you when you realize the clues were always there. What I felt was more like a sudden strange clarity, the sensation of fog lifting over a landscape you thought you knew. Everything was still the same shape. But the light was different now. I picked up my phone. I had 14 unread messages. Bridesmaids, family, a reminder from the venue about the timeline. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I opened my camera and took a photo of the lipstick. Then I placed it back exactly where I'd found it. Same angle, same position beside the soap dish. I walked out of the bathroom, closed the door, and went downstairs to tell my mother the centerpieces looked perfect. I should tell you about Daniel before you imagine him incorrectly. He was not the obvious kind of bad. That was the whole problem, really. The obvious kind, the shouter, the controller, the one who isolates you from friends with small cruelties. Those men are easier to leave. You can point to them clearly. This is what he did. Daniel was charming in the specific way that makes women feel chosen. He remembered small things, the coffee order, the name of your childhood cat, the film you mentioned once in passing that you'd never gotten around to seeing. He had a laugh that made you feel like you'd earned something. He was successful in a way that looked effortless, project manager at an architecture firm, the kind of job that sounds impressive without requiring explanation. He cooked well, listened reasonably, and knew how to argue without raising his voice. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for 11 months. I loved him. Or I had loved him in the way that you love the version of a person you've been building in your mind, brick by careful brick, and then one day you realize the building doesn't quite match the blueprint, and you aren't sure when the plans changed. There had been signs. Of course there had been signs. There are always signs, and the cruelest thing about them is that they are, individually, completely deniable. A text message he angled away from, a name that came up a little too casually, a work dinner that ran 2 hours later than it should have. I had noted each one with the part of my brain I kept very quiet, the analyst, the one who lives behind glass and watches. And I had told her, repeatedly, "You're being paranoid. He's just busy. You're just insecure." She had been right, of course. She was almost always right. I just hadn't wanted to listen to her yet. The lipstick changed that. The lipstick gave me something concrete, a physical object, evidence with a color name I could probably look up on a website if I wanted. I didn't rage about it. I want to be honest about this because I think some part of you is waiting for the scene where I fall apart on the bathroom floor. I didn't. What I felt, and I turned this over for years afterward, trying to understand it, was a kind of grim, almost amused recognition. There it is. Like finding the last piece of a puzzle you were never quite sure you wanted to complete. I went downstairs. I ate half a croissant. I told my mother the centerpieces looked perfect. And I started to think. Soo Jin Park had been my best friend since the 2nd week of university, when she'd sat down next to me in an economics lecture, looked at my notes, and said, "You write too neatly to actually be absorbing any of this." She had been correct. We'd skipped the rest of the lecture and gotten boba tea, and that had been that. She arrived at 9:40 with Prosecco, a bag of pastries, and an energy that immediately dimmed when she looked at my face. What happened? she said. Not a question. Good morning to you too. Maya, she set the Prosecco down on the kitchen counter and looked at me the way she had been looking at me for 12 years. That particular Sue Jin look, which was a combination of forensic attention and profound affection. What is happening behind your eyes right now? Nothing, I said. I'm just calm. You're never this calm. When you're this calm, it means something terrible is happening and you've already decided what to do about it. I poured us both a glass of Prosecco. It was not yet 10 in the morning. I didn't particularly care. I found something this morning, I said. In the bathroom. I showed her the photo on my phone. Sue Jin stared at it. I watched her face move through the same sequence mine had. Recognition, confusion, and then a slow, settling anger that was on my behalf, and somehow the most loving thing she'd done all morning. The burgundy one, she said quietly. The burgundy one. Maya, I'm not canceling the wedding, I said. Sue Jin put her Prosecco glass down very carefully. Okay, tell me what you were doing instead. I don't know yet, I said. But I walked downstairs and looked at the flowers, and the food, and the 300 guests and the dress I've already paid for, and the photographer and the venue deposit we lost 40% of already just by rescheduling once, and I thought, not yet. Not yet as in not yet today, or not yet as in you're planning something. I looked at her over the rim of my glass. Sue Jin, I said, how much do you know about Daniel's colleague Iris? She was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her expression that I couldn't quite read. Something older than today, something that had been waiting in a drawer. She looked at her hands. I've seen them together twice, she said. At the firm's Christmas party last year, and at that rooftop thing in April. Both times it looked like... She stopped. I didn't know how to tell you. I know, I said. I probably wouldn't have believed you. We sat with that for a moment. So what do you want to do? She said. I drank my Prosecco. Through the kitchen window, the morning light was coming in at a clean, flat angle, and outside I could hear my mother directing the parking situation with the efficiency of a military operation. The flowers in the hallway smelled like June. In 6 hours, I was scheduled to walk down an aisle toward a man who had another woman's lipstick in his bathroom. I want to get married, I said. Sue Jin's eyebrows went up. And then, I said, I want what's mine. The morning passed the way mornings do when you have decided something and are waiting for the world to catch up with you. There was hair and makeup, an artist named Claire who had wonderful hands and a soothing voice and talked about her own upcoming move to Barcelona in a way that required nothing from me. There was Sue Jin, who was brilliant and said very little and kept handing me things. Bobby pins, lip liner, the earrings I'd borrowed from her mother. There was my own mother, Diane, who cried when she saw me in the dress and said, "You look so beautiful, baby," and who did not know what I knew, and whom I loved so much in that moment that I had to breathe very carefully to hold it together. The dress was, objectively, extraordinary. An ivory crepe column with a low back and a very small train, simple enough to be elegant, which had been the point. I had chosen it alone, in a small boutique, after the third appointment at the bigger place had involved too many opinions. I'd found it on a Tuesday afternoon with no appointment, just walked in and tried it and thought, that's it. A woman knows. That instinct, at least, had been uncorrupted. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror and thought, you look like a woman who is about to get married. And then, underneath that, you look like a woman who knows exactly what she's doing. My father came in just before we left for the venue and stood in the doorway for a long moment without speaking. Dad was a man who communicated primarily through presence. He had never been especially verbal, but his silences had different weights to them, and I had spent a lifetime learning to read them. This silence was warm and a little helpless, the silence of a man looking at his daughter in a wedding dress and feeling the size of the moment. "You ready?" he said. "Yes," I said. He looked at me closely, the same way Sue Jin had actually, though his version was less forensic and more intuitive. He'd always been able to tell when something was under the surface with me, but today I was smooth. Today I had decided on smooth. "You sure?" he said. "I love you, Dad," I said, which was not the same as answering. He hugged me, and I held on just a beat longer than usual, and then we went to the car. The church was full. 300 people, which had always seemed excessive to me. But Daniel's family was large, and Diane had a social world that extended in all directions. And here we were. The flowers were white and pale green and extraordinary. The florist had won that argument. The light through the stained glass windows made patterns on the stone floor that shifted as clouds passed outside. I walked in on my father's arm and felt the congregation turn toward me and thought, with a kind of distant clarity, I see all of you. Daniel was at the altar. He was wearing the charcoal suit we'd chosen together, and he looked handsome. He was always handsome, and when he saw me, something moved through his face that I watched carefully. Relief. Love, even. The genuine kind. That was the thing that twisted slightly in my chest, not because it hurt, but because it complicated everything. The way the truth always complicates everything. He loved me, and he had done it anyway. These two things were both real, and they lived inside each other like nesting boxes, and I had several hours to figure out what I wanted to do with that. I found Iris immediately. She was seated 4 rows back on the groom's side, in a deep green dress. Beautiful. I could see why. Dark hair, good posture, the practiced stillness of someone who has spent the ceremony being very careful about their expression. She was looking at Daniel with something that was almost perfectly controlled, almost completely neutral, and if you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd have seen nothing at all. I looked right at her. She looked back. I smiled, not the bride's radiant smile I'd been practicing, but a smaller one, a specific one. The kind that says, I see you. Her expression flickered. Just once. Then she looked away. The priest began to speak. The vows were the traditional ones. Daniel had wanted modern ones, but I had said no. I had been oddly insistent about it, and now I understood why, some part of me always knowing. The analyst behind the glass taking notes. I, Daniel, take you, Maya. He said the words, and he meant them, and they were also completely hollow, and somehow both of these things were true simultaneously. And I said my own vows clearly, and without trembling, and my father, watching from the front pew, put his hand over his mouth and looked at the floor. Sujin stood behind me and said nothing, but I felt her presence like a hand on my shoulder blade. I said I do. Daniel said I do. The priest said we were married. The congregation applauded, and the light through the windows shifted gold, and I thought, okay, my love, your turn. The reception was held at a converted warehouse that had been beautifully repurposed, exposed brick, warm Edison lighting, long wooden tables decorated with the centerpieces my mother had fought so fiercely for, and won. The food was excellent. The bar was generous. 300 people, well-fed and open-hearted and slightly giddy with the romance of the day, are a remarkably easy audience. I worked the room. This was not unusual for me. I had always been social, the kind of social that came naturally and didn't cost me anything, which Daniel had always loved, and which had, I now understood, also made me easy to deceive. A woman who is warm with everyone is harder to suspect of watching anyone specifically. I smiled and hugged and accepted congratulations and drank champagne at the exact pace of a happy bride. I danced with my father. I cried, briefly but genuinely, in the bathroom, because you're allowed, even mid-plan, to feel the sadness of something you loved turning out not to be what you thought. That was not weakness. That was just accurate. Daniel was attentive. He held my hand between toasts. He was funny during his speech, genuinely funny, not the labored kind. He talked about the first time we'd met, at a gallery opening where I'd been reading the wall text next to a painting I actually hated, and he'd said, "What do you actually think of it?" And I'd said, "It looks like someone threw soup at a wall and then tried to intellectualize the trauma." And he'd laughed so hard he'd spilled his wine. The room laughed. I laughed. It was a true story. It had happened. I watched Iris from across the room. Sujin had maneuvered herself to a table with good sight lines. I'd texted her a seating suggestion earlier in the morning, very casually, and she sent me a small, steady look every half hour. An update, a confirmation. Iris was drinking more than she should. Not visibly out of control, but steadily, the way you drink when you're trying to sit with something uncomfortable. At some point during the first dance, I saw her look at Daniel and me on the floor, and something crossed her face that was unmistakably grief. I had expected jealousy. Grief was more interesting. After the first dance, while Daniel was pulled aside by his best man for something, I walked over to the bar. Slowly, not toward Iris specifically, just in her direction. I ordered a water. I turned to find her 2 seats away. "Maya," she said. Her voice was steady. Good control. "Iris," I said warmly. "I'm so glad you could come. The dress is beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "I chose it alone, actually. There's something to be said for knowing your own mind." A beat. Her jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Absolutely," she said. I smiled, touched her arm lightly, the brief, meaningless touch of a bride working a room, and moved on. Behind me, I heard her set her glass down on the bar. Ryan Chen had been Daniel's best friend since secondary school, which meant he had also, by proximity, become part of my life for 4 years. He was a decent man. Genuinely decent in the way that some people are, not because he worked at it, but because it was simply how he was assembled. He made bad jokes and remembered birthdays, and would drive you to the airport at 5 in the morning without complaining. He also knew, I had suspected it for 3 weeks, in the way that the analyst behind the glass suspects things. There had been a dinner party in March where Ryan had looked between Daniel and me with an expression of someone who was holding something very heavy and trying not to show the strain. There had been a moment at the engagement party where I'd caught him watching Daniel talk to Iris, and then looking away quickly when he saw me notice. Ryan found me at the edge of the dance floor near the end of the night, after the speeches and the cake and the last waltz. He looked like a man trying to decide something. "Maya," he said. He was holding his whiskey with both hands, which for Ryan was a sign of something. "Ryan," I said, "I need to tell you something." He paused, looked at the floor. "I should have told you something sooner." I waited. "Daniel and Iris. It's been going on for about 8 months. I found out in February. I told him to end it. He said he would. He stopped. His voice was careful and miserable. "I should have told you. I kept thinking he'd fix it himself, and then suddenly it was the wedding, and it wasn't fixed, and I know," I said. He looked up. "I've known since this morning," I said. "Maya." I found her lipstick in the bathroom. I said it almost conversationally. "The burgundy one. Bordeaux, maybe." Ryan closed his eyes briefly. "God." "It's okay," I said. "You carrying this for months, that's not a great feeling, is it? That weight." "I'm so sorry, I should have—" "Yes," I said simply. Not unkindly, but directly. "You should have. We can talk about that later. Right now, I need to know one thing." He looked at me steadily. "Does she know about me? Not in the abstract. In the specifics. Did he make her promises?" Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "He told her—" He stopped, seemed to weigh something. "He told her you two had been falling apart for a year, that the wedding was more about family pressure than anything real." Something settled in me, cold and clean. "Okay," I said. "What are you going to do?" I looked across the room to where Daniel was laughing with his uncle, relaxed in the way of a man who had gotten away with something and felt the relief of the day being nearly over. "I already did most of it," I said. "The rest will take care of itself." Ryan looked at me for a long, searching moment. Then he said, quietly, "You know, I think he knew, somewhere, that he didn't deserve you, and instead of doing anything about it, he just stayed comfortable," I said. "Yeah." We stood together in silence for a moment, watching the party wind down around us. Somewhere across the room, Soo-Jin had appeared at Iris's table and was having what appeared to be a completely ordinary conversation. "You're extraordinary," Ryan said quietly, almost to himself. "I know," I said. And then, because I still had the capacity for dry humor even in the ruins, "It's genuinely one of my best qualities." He laughed despite himself, despite everything. I found out what Soo-Jin said to Iris the following week, when she told me everything over dumplings in my new apartment. She'd introduced herself warmly as a mutual friend of the couple, She'd complimented Iris's dress genuinely because it was actually a beautiful dress. And then she'd said very casually, the way Soo-jin did everything important, which was casually, "Daniel mentioned you two have known each other for years. He talks about the firm like a second family." Iris had agreed. Then Soo-jin had said, "He's such a romantic, isn't he? The lipstick thing?" Iris had gone very still. "The bathroom," Soo-jin had said, as if reminiscing. "Maya told me he kept it there. As like a keepsake," she said, "from the very beginning." A pause. She thought it was genuinely one of the sweetest things he'd ever done. Iris had excused herself shortly after. What Soo-jin had calculated precisely was this. Iris didn't know about the lipstick. She'd left it accidentally. The idea that Daniel had kept it, intentionally, romantically, as a keepsake about Maya, would have accomplished two things. First, it planted the question, had he been playing Iris the entire time? Second, it suggested that my relationship with Daniel was far more intimate and intentional than he had represented it. "Was that cruel?" Soo-jin asked me over dumplings. "To Iris?" I thought about it. She made her own choices. But no, I don't think so. I think she was lied to as much as I was, just in different directions. "She texted him 4 times in the car on the way home, apparently," Soo-jin said. "Ryan told me." "How do you know what Ryan told you?" She focused carefully on her dumpling. "We've been texting." "Soo-jin, it's separate from your situation." "It is absolutely not separate from my situation." But I was laughing, just slightly, and she was trying to hide a smile, and there was something extraordinarily human about the fact that love and its complications refused to stay neatly in their own lanes. I woke up in the bridal suite alone. This had been the plan, or rather, this had been the improvised version of the plan, arrived at somewhere around midnight. Daniel had come to find me at the end of the reception, slightly drunk and relaxed and reaching for my hand with a warmth that I knew was genuine, because this was the cruelest part. He loved me, and he had done it anyway. I had said quietly, with the window of the suite open behind me, and the night air coming in, "I think I need to sleep alone tonight." He had looked confused. "Maya." "It's been an enormous day," I said. "I'm overwhelmed. I just need quiet." He had accepted this because I delivered it calmly, and because men like Daniel accept the versions of things they can handle. He'd kissed my forehead, said goodnight, gone to the room he'd kept as a changing room. I lay in the big white bed and looked at the ceiling. I didn't sleep for a long time, and when I did, I dreamed of nothing particular, just light and the sound of my own voice saying words I couldn't quite hear. In the morning, I ordered room service. Eggs and toast and black coffee. I ate sitting cross-legged on the bed in the hotel robe, watching the city come awake outside the window. My phone had 17 messages. I read them all carefully and answered none of them. Then I called my lawyer. I had made this appointment 3 days ago, the evening after the most recent unexplained late night. The analyst behind the glass had finally spoken loudly enough that I had listened. The appointment was Monday morning. Today was Sunday. I had 24 hours. After the call, I made one more. My mother. "Mom," I said when she answered. "Sweetheart," she said immediately. "You don't sound right." "I'm okay," I said. "I need to tell you something." The silence on her end was the listening kind. "I found something yesterday morning," I said, "before the wedding. And I need to tell you what I found, and then I need to tell you what I'm going to do about it. And then I need you to not do anything dramatic, because I love you, and I have already handled it." She was quiet for a long moment. "Is this about Daniel?" she said. "Yes." Another silence. Then, very softly, "I had a feeling." "I know, Mom." I didn't say anything because... "I know," I said. "It's okay. It's really okay." And I meant it, which surprised me slightly. "Can you be here on Monday?" "I'll be there tonight," she said, in the voice that means nothing in the world will stop her. Here is the part I did not explain to Daniel before the wedding, or during it, or in the days immediately after, The prenuptial agreement he had signed 5 months earlier, the one his own lawyer had reviewed and declared fair, the one he'd signed with the easy confidence of a man who expected to be married forever and saw the whole thing as a formality, had been drafted with considerable care by a lawyer who specialized in protecting the financial interests of the party most likely to be wronged. Daniel had, over the course of our relationship, encouraged me to invest in a joint portfolio with him, which I had done, to the tune of 40% of my savings. He had also, on 2 occasions, borrowed from my personal account with the intention of repaying. The repayments had come, but late and partial. None of this had felt sinister at the time. In hindsight, the analyst behind the glass had filed it all carefully. The prenup, drafted in the early months of our engagement, included specific terms around the division of that joint portfolio, the repayment of outstanding personal loans, and, this was the quiet detail that Daniel had not read carefully enough, a clause regarding conduct during the engagement period, which had been flagged and signed and notarized, and was now a document with legal weight. I had not included it to be vindictive. I had included it because the analyst behind the glass said, "Cover yourself." And the analyst behind the glass was, as I have noted, almost always right. The marriage, having lasted approximately 16 hours, was going to be dissolved. But the terms of the dissolution were already written. Daniel found out about the clause on Tuesday morning when his lawyer called him. Sue Jin was with me when my phone lit up with his name. I looked at it and let it ring. "Do you want to talk to him?" she said. "Eventually," I said. "Not yet." She nodded and poured us both more tea, and outside the window of my new apartment the morning was very quiet and clean. He came to the apartment on Wednesday. I had expected anger. I got something more complicated. Daniel at the door with the particular look of a man who has been stripped of his narrative about himself. Not the villain's sneer, not the charmer's ease, just someone standing in the rubble of the version of himself he had maintained for 4 years, looking tired and smaller than he used to seem. I let him in, made tea, because I'm my mother's daughter, and we make tea when we don't know what else to do with our hands. We sat at my kitchen table, which was small. I had moved into a 1-bedroom with very deliberate furniture, nothing left over from the life we'd been building together. He looked around at it, at the absence of himself in the space, and something in his face shifted. "I don't even know where to start," he said. "Then don't," I said. "I'll start. You've been having an affair with Iris Kwan for approximately 8 months. You told her that our relationship had been falling apart for a year, which wasn't true. You kept her lipstick in our shared bathroom, probably by accident, and I found it on our wedding morning." I paused. "Is there anything factually incorrect in any of that?" He looked at his tea. "No." "Okay. Maya." His voice cracked slightly on the word. Just slightly. "I loved you. I need you to know that." "I know," I said. "That's the part I keep turning over. It doesn't actually help." "I got scared," he said. I know that's not an excuse. I got scared, and instead of talking to you, I found a softer landing." He flinched. "Yeah." I looked at him across the table. Daniel, who remembered my coffee order. Daniel, who had made me laugh so hard at a gallery opening that I'd known immediately, with that clarifying female instinct, that this one was going to matter. Daniel, who had loved me genuinely and deceived me systematically, and somehow managed to hold both of those things as if they didn't cancel each other out. "I'm not angry," I said. "Or I am, but it's not the main thing." "What's the main thing?" I thought about it honestly. "Sad, I think, that you didn't trust me enough to just say the thing, whatever the thing was." He was quiet for a long moment. "I know. The clause in the prenup. I'm not contesting it," he said. "I should have read it more carefully, but I'm not contesting it. It's fair." A pause. "It's more than fair, actually." There was something almost respectful in that. I'll give him that. "What about Iris?" I asked. He looked at his hands. "She's not talking to me." Something settled in me that might have been satisfaction, or might have been the absence of something I'd been waiting to find out. "Okay," I said. "I'm going to be honest. I don't know what happened. She just suddenly seemed to think I'd been—" He paused, confused. "I don't know. Something about the lipstick." I kept my expression completely neutral. People get complicated ideas, I said. He nodded slowly, not quite seeing it, and I didn't help him see it, and the tea between us cooled. The days after that were strange in the way that aftermath is always strange. The aftermath of weather, of loss, of something that changed the landscape so completely that you have to learn the terrain again from scratch. I went back to work. I was a senior editor at a mid-sized publishing house, and my colleagues had sent flowers when they'd heard the news and had the grace not to ask too many questions when I returned. I edited a manuscript about a woman crossing Iceland alone on horseback, and I found, unexpectedly, that I loved it with my whole chest. I took long walks in the evenings, through the neighborhood that was just starting to feel like mine. I started cooking more than I had when the kitchen had been shared. There was something about having the kitchen entirely to myself, making exactly what I wanted, exactly how I wanted it. That felt like a small daily declaration of something. My mother came to stay for a week, which was both useful and occasionally too much, in the precise proportions that best friend stays always are. She cleaned my bathroom without asking, and left casseroles in the freezer and cried once, briefly, on the couch. And I sat next to her and held her hand and thought, I come by the loving too much honestly. Sue Jin came to dinner twice a week. She was, it became apparent, seeing Ryan with increasing frequency, which produced a complicated mixture of feelings I worked through over several very long walks. I liked Ryan. I believed he was genuinely decent. I also knew he had carried knowledge that had cost me something, and that there was a version of me that could not quite forgive the delay. I told Sujin this directly, because that was the only kind of friendship we knew. I know, she said. He knows too. He's carrying it. He should, I said. For a while. Then, but not forever. She looked at me with something that was almost reverent. How do you do that? Do what? Be fair, she said. When you have every right not to be. I thought about it. Outside, the city moved and hummed in its evening way, and the light was doing that thing it does in late summer, gold and slightly exhausted, slanting at exactly the angle that makes everything look like something worth keeping. I don't know, I said honestly. It's cheaper than the alternative. It was a Sunday when I felt it. I was in my apartment, cross-legged on the kitchen floor with the newspaper open and coffee going cold beside me. I had this habit of starting the newspaper and losing the thread of it and just sitting with it in my lap, looking at nothing, in a way that was actually quite peaceful once you stopped thinking of it as wasted time. The windows were open. Outside, the street was doing its Sunday morning thing, slow and unhurried. Someone's dog, the distant sound of a market setting up 3 blocks over. My phone was face down on the counter. I had gotten very good at leaving my phone face down. The divorce proceedings, a word that still sounded faintly surreal, divorce, for a marriage that had lasted 16 hours, were moving quietly through the system. The financial terms had been settled. The apartment he and I had been planning to move into had been released. The deposit, per the prenup, had come back to me. I had used a portion of it to repaint my apartment, which was now a warm ivory that looked different in different lights, and which I loved unreservedly. I sat on my kitchen floor and drank my cold coffee and thought, I am okay. Not dramatically okay. Not okay as victory, as triumph, as the final note of a lesson learned. Just okay in the plain, quiet, daily sense. Okay the way mornings are okay when you are somewhere safe and have things to do that you care about, and people who love you, and the newspaper open in your lap. I thought about Daniel, briefly, in the dispassionate way that you think about something that is genuinely finished. I hoped he would figure out whatever it was that had scared him enough to do what he'd done. I thought about Iris, too. Iris in her green dress, grief crossing her face during the first dance, choosing something that had been built on a lie and having to live with what she found when the lie fell away. I hoped she was okay too, actually, in the plain, quiet sense. I thought about the lipstick, burgundy and worn at the angle of someone else's lips, tucked beside the ceramic soap dish I'd bought in Lisbon. Then I put it down, the way you put things down when they've finished being useful, and looked at the morning. The coffee was cold enough now that I should make a fresh cup. The market 3 blocks over would be setting up its flower stalls by now. Sunday flowers, the impractical kind that were too big for a small apartment, but which I had been buying weekly since moving in, because I could, and because I wanted to, and because no one was going to tell me the arrangement was too much. I would buy ranunculus today, probably. Or peonies if they had them. Something with a lot of petals. The kind that falls apart slowly over a week, in a way that's magnificent, and then heartbreaking, and then over. I got up off the kitchen floor. I took the cold coffee to the sink and poured it out. I put the kettle on. My phone lit up on the counter, face down so I only saw the edge of it glow. I turned it over. A message from Sujin. A photo of her and Ryan at what appeared to be a very early morning fish market, both of them making expressions of exaggerated horror at something in a tank. Below it, "Don't let anyone tell you romance is dead." I laughed. Properly, fully, the laugh that comes from somewhere real and doesn't have an audience. It bounced off the ivory walls of my kitchen and disappeared. I typed back, "Marry him and name your first child after me." She sent back 3 emojis, a fish, a ring, and a face with raised eyebrows. I set the phone down and waited for the kettle. Outside, a door opened somewhere in the building, and I heard footsteps on the stairs, someone leaving for the morning, someone beginning their Sunday. The light through the kitchen window was the early kind, clear and unhurried. On the counter, the kettle began its slow, working toward a boil. I reached into the cabinet for the good mug, the ceramic one I'd bought myself the second week in the new apartment, blue and slightly uneven in the way of something handmade, found at the market stall between the flower stall and a woman selling old maps. I'd bought it because it made me happy when I looked at it. Simple as that. The mug made me happy. The kettle reached its pitch and clicked off. I poured the water, and I stood in my kitchen on a Sunday morning in my own apartment, mine, all mine, every pale ivory wall, an impractical flower and handmade mug. And I held the warmth between both hands, and I breathed, and I was fine. Better than fine. I was exactly where I decided to be.